I've known Gustell, but pretty close actually. So he was an undergraduate at Hope College where I teach. And then he got a PhD in theoretical chemistry and also in chemical education from Madison. He then taught undergrad at the University of Virgin Islands and at Hope College. So he's an experienced educator and did quite a bit of research in education, particularly in optimal ways to use online tools for pedagogy and in education. As Del mentioned, he now works for Catalyst Education, and he's still working with the LibreText team. And so we're very happy to have really one of the world's leaders in how to use online tools to help education with us. So Justin, please go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks for the introduction, Brent. And continuing on that affiliation of doing research together, I also have done research with both Amber and Rachel, who are on here. It's been an excellent time to get to work with lots of people that I've been working with for years and collaborate on some things I'm really passionate about. I'm going to try to share my screen and let me know if it works okay, Brent.
Yep, looks good.
All right. So as Brent mentioned, a lot of my research starting off, my graduate career was on textbooks themselves. So one of the textbooks that's available in the chemistry library is called Chem Prime, which I wrote with my research mentor, John Moore. And then we digitized that, broke it down, and did a lot of research into how textbooks could really be redesigned. And then I did my thesis working on that and evaluating whether or not students really interacted the way we wanted to. So I'll touch on that today, but I think that the thing that we need to start with is really where do textbooks come from and what is the point of using them in our class and what do we perceive them to be useful for? So learning materials exist in all different forms, right? You can go to the websites, you can look at news articles, you can look at different websites about different materials, Wikipedia. There's lecture materials, there's videos, there's many different ways that we can interact with material. Specifically though, I'm going to bring up this idea that we can get material and learning from a textbook itself. So a book that was designed to actually contain the material that we want to look at. We could also, though, look at just regular books in general, because most books tend to follow the exact same format, which is having chapters, units, and sections, right? This is what we're used to. We're used to putting some sort of structure in order for people to know what types of main ideas there are, what types of sections underneath those, and then getting things out of there and then breaking them down into what we're going to test you over. Sorry, I know you're sharing my screen, but I'm realizing, there we go, perfect. So this is a nice little hierarchy that we're all familiar with. In fact, we possibly are too familiar with it. Because when it came time to advance the textbook and think about new ways to add things to the textbook to keep up with technology, we just started adding things like pictures and videos just straight into it or as accessories onto it. But a book is more than just those textbook sections and chapters. There's also typically a story or a narration, right? An author provides their voice to get one section to the next. So as you read it, it has a consistent, approachable voice. They also have some motivational things. A lot of textbooks have been just popping in a bunch of little inserts about this is useful in this specific country for this environment or for this technological advancement, trying to motivate students to learn. Examples from history or examples from different parts of the world or in space, or possibly just example problems to solve. And a textbook should be trying to make connections where possible. But you'll notice that those things on the bottom here, these examples, connections, motivations, they could be in some way, shape, or form included into the chapter section narration, but they don't have to be. So you could really have textbooks that are really hard to read, which means they don't really tie things together really well. They're more of an encyclopedia or Wikipedia type of thing. Or they could be things more like a book, a fictional book that have a nice story that just goes through everything. Believe it or not, people have actually done a ton of research on students and their textbook use. A lot of us just assume that students are using them, or actually for the older faculty among us, they might be jaded enough to realize that students don't use them at all. but there's a lot of people out there that have researched it. So from as far back as the 80s, or even further back in the 70s, there's been papers. There's people that say you should read that whole textbook right now, or maybe you should read it in different times. There's an article in Journal of Chemical Education about organic chemistry, meaning that you should study as much as you can in the first few weeks, and then other ones that say to read it at different times. I'm going to focus a few seconds on this article, which I really like, from 1975, an unobtrusive measure to study textbook usage. In this study, they actually glued small little bits of glue into the corner of every single textbook page and then passed them out to a group of students. And then they would collect those books every few days and then measure how many of the glue dots had been broken. So that way they could get a measure of whether or not students maybe not even read the book, or at least opened the page to that part of the book. And this is a picture of what they discovered. So on average, students were only breaking around 2.5 glue dots per week. So you can see there's obviously a little drop there, possibly because it was the beginning of a test section. So some students read more, and then you obviously wouldn't read very much right before. You wouldn't break any new pages right before a test because you'd be reviewing old pages. So you get this little pattern that comes about. And I think a lot of people might be surprised that you're only reading 2 to 3 pages here, but that's a very tedious way to look at it. Delmar would never want to do that with his text when they can do the online analysis these days. For my research back in 2011, we actually had 2 lectures that were assigned a hard copy and one that was assigned an online text that we used. And as you can see, students from the different lecture sections, so 1 and 2 are groups that did have a hard copy assigned, and group 3 did not, or lecture 3. So the fact that the textbook was used more often in sections 1 and 2 isn't surprising, because that one was the one that they were assigned to. And lecture section 3 obviously used on the hard copy textbook fairly little, because it's down here at the 1 level. What a lot of professors like to give as many resources as possible to students. They might say, hey, these are a bunch of good books out there on this subject. You should try reading a bunch of other ones. And this was done in this class as well. Other books are available in the library on reserve, that kind of thing. And you'll see all 3 sections didn't touch any books that were not the one that was assigned to them. So students don't really go out there exploring different books. That's not how our students worked 10 years ago. And I can guarantee you they're not going to be looking at any other textbooks right now. They probably will Google something and maybe read something from somewhere else these days. Now, here's something that's pretty interesting about textbooks. I told you earlier that we do a lot of things to try to fit current technology into the old system of sections, units, and chapters. And hard copy textbooks tend to just include a CD-ROM or an online supplement that people can go to outside of the textbook for supplemental work. Very much this idea of add-ons, like Christmas tree ornaments just being stuck onto things, not necessarily part of that organic nature of the material. And you can see that on the bottom picture here, nobody uses any of those things. So it's just not done. In fact, there are fewer people who are using the online materials than there were in people who are using another book that was suggested possibly. So how much do students actually use the text? This is, again, a decade ago, but that was when students were just getting into having some online course experience in high school. So I think that this is going to be even more true now, and there's been data that's been taken out there that proves this as well. But I'm using this because I have it broke down. So how often did you use it? The students that were in the textbook class, really still only very few would be using it. A quarter of the class really barely touched it at all. And the students, still 20% of them didn't use any book at all in the lecture 3 that used the online textbook. So a lot of people just not using it. Where are they using it? In the library or at home? But really, it doesn't really matter if it's online or a hard copy book. They tend to use it the same. The only thing that's maybe a little bit different is whether or not they're using it in the lab. That would be the group that used the online one. In this school, they didn't really have online computers, or they didn't have computers in the chemistry lab. But hard copy textbooks, as Del mentioned, super, super expensive. I'm not going to go over this because this is an old graphic, and we all are here for the same reason, which was Del said. We need to rethink this hard copy textbook thing. But we also need to rethink what a textbook could be. So an example I want to use is when I taught in the University of the Virgin Islands down in St. Thomas. And they had this really weird way of describing how to get somewhere. So addresses were not based on roads. They were based on landmarks. So the picture on the right was actually taken from up on top of a hillside overlooking one of the big beaches that the tourists like to go to. And that is really close to a location that was commonly used to describe how to get from one part of the island to the other part. In fact, it's right over here. Drake's seat is about where this picture was taken, which is that point right on top. I don't know if you can see my mouse or pointer, but hopefully you can.
Yes.
So that picture was taken. You can? Perfect.
Yep.
See, that was taken right over here, right around here where there's a bunch of roads that all meet, and you can see that they go through there. There was a hill that had a massively big tree on it. And people would say, take the road from the city up the hill to where the large tree was before Hurricane Marilyn. And that was a landmark everyone in the island knew about. They knew where the big tree was. And then when the tree was gone, they just referred to it as the place where the big tree was before Hurricane Marilyn. Hurricane Marilyn, I believe, was in the 80s. I think it was 85. I lived in the Virgin Islands in 2011 to 2014. So a good 30 years later, after the tree fell by the hurricane. And yet, when I first moved to the island, I didn't know how to get from one side of the island to the other. The landmark that was given to me was the tree where it used to stand before Hurricane Marilyn. Go there and then take a right. And this just gives you an idea of the cultural significance of landmarks and what kind of landmarks that you use when you're navigating around. Textbooks, that navigational structure is units, chapters, sections, and those are the landmarks that we're used to using. But that's a cultural thing. That's not something that has to be done that way. So for instance, this is from one of my courses I taught back in 2018, and it's in Moodle. In Moodle, in the upper left-hand corner, you see these 3 bars. At this point in your lives, you know what these mean, more than likely, because they're everywhere. They're on all the apps on your phone. They're on most websites. And we don't need to be told what this is anymore. It does not use the word menu. It's just 3 bars. And then over here, there's this gear icon. Again, a ubiquitous icon that helps us to navigate. So in the world of online interfaces, what's important is thinking about landmarks and giving students a place to feel like they can find a sense of a location within this virtual world. The textbook that's a hard copy, that location is frequently by touch. How thick is your book? How many pages in do you need to go? I know chapter 3 is around here, and I'll open to that. There's no physical tactile way to do that. So in the virtual world, what we really want to think about is navigational landmarks and how to make students comfortable with where they are and how to get to the information that you want to get to. So a lot of my work and research was in pedagogical design and assessment. So the work that I did, which is linked to on the website for this agenda, there's a link right after this agenda's my talk's title that says link to framework, and that links to a textbook, well, not textbook, a small article that I wrote for all of us to use on LibreText to design our online experiences for our students better. And that's based off of a framework that I wrote called Content, Architecture, and Pedagogy. And essentially, it says that you should not just put a PDF of a textbook online because it undermines all the advantages that hypertext online medium has to increase student learning. In other words, this isn't a physical book. So things like page numbers and things like chapter 5 or chapter 7 don't necessarily mean the same thing. They need to be thought of in a different way. All right. And this framework is described in that link that I sent there. But essentially, it describes the overlap of 3 big parts of trying to give information to a student so they can learn it. There's accessibility, of course. Accessibility is part of the architecture. So architecture is, how is your material designed? What are you going to use? Chapters, units, sections? Or are you going to use just different pages and sub pages? Are you going to do this in a video that has links within the video? That structure you give your material has to be accessible, has to be explorable, has to be able to have some scaffolding in it. That word there that says transparency, which is like wholeness. So in other words, you don't want students to feel like they're stuck within a grove of 4 or 5 trees. You really want to, once in a while, give them the sense of a whole entire forest around them. So are you transparent about where we're going and what the world around us looks like in terms of the material that you're looking at? Content is the thing I'm going to talk about the very least, because one, we're all in different subject areas. And also, all of you know your material vastly better than I will, right? So content is the stuff you guys are specialists in. And therefore, I'm not worried about that one. But architecture and pedagogy are two things that really do tie together in a way that I think is novel to a lot of faculty, because we have spent our whole lives in academia. Frequently, we think of that as being tied together specifically. So how do you organize your material? And then how you're teaching that material are frequently frequently just tied together. But in textbooks, you really want to separate those two things. How do you think about teaching that material? And then how could the way you organize that material tie into that better? Perhaps you use a textbook that you've always used and you jump around. I'm going to use chapter 3, and also I'm going to have you go read something in chapter 10 because I want to talk about that now instead of back then. That actually completely removes all of the advantages of having a single voice or narrative in a textbook, right? Because you're not going the same order as the author. So then you're going to jump around in weird ways, which is going to remove that cohesiveness that makes a single textbook order advantageous over possibly just looking at different articles in an encyclopedia. Pedagogy, what you're doing in the classroom, how you're teaching it, how you're going to approach that content, architecture, how are you going to organize that to help students out. And there's a bunch of stuff in here that is in the overlapping areas. I'm a chemist, so a lot of my work has been based on Wu and Shaw's designs for pedagogical design. But there's a ton of people out there that study this. You might even have somebody in your department that's DBER, which is discipline-based educational research.
Well, looks like Justin may have frozen for a minute here. Hopefully he'll come back in just a few seconds.
Faculty, there's large scale, but.
So Justin, you froze there for a few seconds for us. So right after you talked about the discipline specific stuff, after Wu and Shaw.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just had a little notification pop up that said that my internet went a little unstable. So thanks for calling that out. Yeah, I would say that many of you might work with discipline-based education researchers in your departments, and I encourage that use when you're thinking about maybe designing and building your own material to contribute to LibreText, because they can help you think about how does pedagogy tie to the content. There are fewer people who work in specifically how to use architecture of your material, how you organize your material. That's mostly the area that I work in. So I leave that to you guys as well to think about, but the main thing that you want to start with is just recognizing that the hypertext world is definitely different from one area to another in the way that the book was giving it to us. We can link things together, actually physically putting in links to things. So you don't have to say, I'm linking these two concepts by writing 5 or 5 paragraphs. You can actually have things more explicitly put together. So that nonlinearity and interactivity that hypertext learning really provides. So we've talked about content, architecture, and pedagogy. So this is kind of where if you're going to start taking some notes for what you might actually want to do in the day of this workshop, this is where I would start with some notes, which is number one, you have to come up with what your learning objectives for the course are. And I know you've probably been beaten over the head with this, but you need to know what objectives you have so you can start breaking them down into how many are you going to teach in a given lecture or in a given exam period. What conceptual links between material are important for your students to understand. So is it important that one of your learning objectives ties something on exam 2 back to exam 1, or from this book that you're reading in your English class back to another book that uses a similar period in history or something like that? What depth of a concept needs to be covered? Being very specific about how deep into a topic you want to go. Most of us know you can go all the way down to a PhD level depth in a topic. But that's not just for the teacher, that's for the student as well. Write your learning objectives and your course so that it's very clear at what point is deep enough. How are you going to assess that content? That's something that students need to know. I don't say that need as in they're point grubbing crazy people. It's just part of being a student and allocating time accordingly. You need to know what things are expected of your courses at what time so you can allocate that time and energy appropriately. And that helps to reduce stress for students as well. How many sample problems are you going to give, for instance? That's another content question. Do they need a lot of extra problems for a certain type of calculus problem? Or maybe a few more examples of statistics because people make a lot of minor mistakes and just need to get some more practice into it. Then you can think about the architecture. How are you going to group those together? How are you going to make them tied together in such a way that makes the most sense for the structure of the material that you're looking at? So for instance, how many learning objectives are you going to put on a single page? This, I think, is the biggest thing I struggled with in redesigning the textbook the first time I did it back in 2010. And that is, I'm so used to putting everything that's kind of vaguely together underneath one chapter title. And then some sections really break up the reading. They don't break it up in any meaningful way or semi-meaningful, but it's really more to encourage the narrative is when you break up a textbook in chemistry, at least. But when you're looking at single web pages, you kind of want those to be their own little article of some sort of idea of, we're going to cover these things on this page, because that way when students go to review things, they go to a specific page with a specific objective, or maybe one or two objectives. Or maybe you want to make one page that's going to be everything that you should know from this week, or everything that they should know for a specific period of assessment. How are they going to be connected? How are you going to cover them? Are you going to hyperlink them in some way? And how integrated do you want your syllabus to be? Do you use an online course manager? Do you want that to be your syllabus? How interactive do you want your expectations for your course and your timeline for your course and your content for your course to align together? And I'm going to jump down to that last one because it's in bold for a reason, because this is the thing that I think a lot of people struggle with in day-to-day teaching, as well as when they're writing a book. Are you including something because you can include it, or because it helps learning? Just because there's a really great movie out there that's just really interesting to you, if it doesn't tie directly into one of these things, then it's not really beneficial to that learning experience. In fact, a lot of people, if you look at textbooks themselves or web pages, students are trained to ignore things that are just little boxes that look like information that could be cool. That just means don't look at that and move around it. By the way, a lot of my research is in eye tracking, so I tend to look at a lot of eye tracking research. For instance, here's an example course from Otterbein University. If I said that wrong, I apologize. It follows a really standard textbook structure. There's a chapter on atomic structure. There are sections that are just links to different articles on LibreText. And then there in the hydrogen atom, there's a couple outside of LibreText links to, this is a simulator of some sort. And then you can see there's a nice structure. So this is basically, I built a table of contents and it links out there. That's the simplest way to build an online textbook for your course out of LibreText materials. But you could also do like UC Davis did for a while, where you got it lecture by lecture. Here are the readings and videos for each of the lectures. And you know, there's a worksheet that will be due that relates to this material, and another worksheet there. So you can put your worksheets right into there. This is becoming more of an integrated experience for the students. Or you can design a whole entire course shell or a course design that's based on units, and there's homework and there's agendas. And that agenda there could look like the page you just saw, broken down by lecture so students know where to go. Again, this isn't about just how are you going to put these things in there so it makes sense to you. It's putting things together in a way that's navigable by students to find out where they are right now and how do they get to the material that they want to find. So having things linked in multiple places is not a horrible thing. The agenda can have it by time. Or if they just remember, I remember there was a slideshow or a lecture slideshow on this, they can go straight to there. If they need to review material for unit 3 because there's an exam over, all that's going to be kept right there. And maybe this area does link out to the homework and does link over to some lecture shows. That's okay, because you want to make this navigable, and that doesn't necessarily mean linear. So this is one of the more recent ones by Delmar, actually, that has a lecture with a topic and then a little blurb that summarizes what this lecture is going to be. So the main learning objectives from this lecture are listed here. So it's very easy for students to see what they learned when. So then it's not a matter of trying to figure out these words that are there and whether that homework has to do with which parts of it. It's this homework here will be tied to this topic. And then there's worksheets to work on and the readings, and there's some assumed knowledge. So this is an important thing that LibreText really allows you to do better than most textbooks. A textbook that's on Calc 2 is on Calc 2, and they might say you should know this from Calc 1, but there's no Calc 1 material in that book. Whereas in LibreText, it's a library. So this temperature conversion dimensional analysis is not a topic that's taught in this course and would not be in this book, but it's assumed knowledge that he knows students struggle with. So he puts a link to that other resource so students can actually tie back to other courses that they've taken as well. So this nonlinearity, this idea of navigating through a multidimensional hyperspace, is an important difference between an old textbook and a current textbook. So you can also put other things like news articles that you would update on an annual basis every time you teach the course, or you, since it's live and it's a living textbook, if something comes up on Tuesday and it talks about stuff you guys covered on Monday, you can still put it in there on Tuesdays and then mention, hey, I just put that in there so that when you review for the test, it's there, because it's pretty cool. And maybe I'll put a question on it. So that kind of brings me to just a quick little summary of where I am currently working on in this digital platform for open educational resources. As Brent and Del mentioned, I no longer work at Hope College. I'm now at Catalyst Education, which is the company that makes LabFlow, which is mostly chemistry, although we are moving into biology in the fall in a minor way, and then much bigger in subsequent years. So if we have any interested biologists after listening to this, definitely you can contact me. But the reason I'm pointing this out is because we also have a big commitment to open educational resources like LibreText. We're partnered with them. And we publish our own list of laboratories that are open ed and are included in the LibreText platform. They're not there yet, but they're in the process of moving from our library, which was just published a couple weeks ago, and then moving them into LibreText as well, because honestly, we are committed to open education for all students. If we make something that's really good, we want people to all benefit from it, because we think open ed is the way of the future. It's where students are going to be going. It's where faculty are going to be going. And we want to support that endeavor as much as possible. And there's a bunch of things here that we do with those. We include learning objectives. We align them to course objectives, for instance, with the MCAT or things like that. We have laboratory skills and equipment that are all clearly outlined for students, and even safety and waste consideration. So we put all these design criteria for lab, exact same stuff we're talking about. And we really tried to make these things as clear as possible. So I'm jumping to here real quick. This is actually from a paper that I have a citation earlier from Michael Siri in the Israel Journal of Chemical Education. And it has this framework that he's built for, you want to introduce chemical concepts. They should be lecture, quiz material, discussion material, and introduce laboratory techniques, video simulations, things like that. And then addressing the affective dimensions. So learners' confidence and motivation are all things that are really important in getting students prepared for a successful career in hands-on chemistry. And you'll notice that our LabFlow platform actually has a button to click things to add it straight to their calendar. Again, more ways that you can get students to feel at home and comfortable in this digital environment so they know where to go when they need to find information. A lot of students use calendars. That was the biggest request we had, which a lot of people would be surprised. They want calendar integration. They wanted their deadlines for every assignment to go straight into their Google Calendar or their iPhone so that they don't even have to go here to figure out when things are due. All of our videos are lined up. So for instance, this is a big zoomed out version of a course so that there's a single experiment, all the things to go with it, ending with a quiz, all the things for this training exercise with a quiz. And like that framework said, you want to learn about safety, you want to learn about the background for how to do things. And then it's very clear when you do your first experiment, there's your background material. Here are the videos to prepare you for the lab. Here's the pre-lab quiz to make sure you are prepared, and then our data and report material there. So the company actually drew me to it in a large way because it follows a lot of the pedagogical practice that we really want in our department and our materials for our students. And I am head of their open educational resources library. So I'm in charge of designing a bunch of labs with different GOB, organic, or introductory or general material, chemistry materials, and with lots of different optional analyses for all of your different classes, which can be added in whichever you feel like it. And we have over 250 now variations because this is 2 weeks old and we've already added 50 more labs to our library. So with that, I'll keep it here. Wanted to wrap up and say that really the whole goal for our company is that we really love to work with open educational resources, get the material out there, because we know that it's really our tools and the way that we are designing and building things in our online laboratory, pre-lab experiments, pre-lab quizzes is where our value is really added for your students. And the materials that you want to use are open and available, and they'll be in the LibreText. So thank you for your time. Hopefully you learned something about how to think about online textbooks in the virtual hypertext world. And we have time for questions, which I have not looked at anything to do with the chat box. So Brent, I don't know if there's been any questions that have come up.
Not too many, although one just popped up now from Amanda Cologne.
Okay.
And so, well, you can just read that, Justin, or Amanda, if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
Sure. So we use, so I'm Amanda Cologne. I teach veterinary technology at Mercy College in Dobbs Ferry, New York. And this is all obviously very interesting, but I guess the only question, because I saw you implemented some quizzes and some review activities. So with that, is this something that could be integrated in some of our educational platforms that are already existing? For example, like we use Blackboard. Is there, because I know in terms of grading, you know, it makes things a little easier, plus just having the students get access to it through their Blackboard would be easier as well.
Yeah, there's definitely been cases where these links here, you could build this whole thing in Blackboard, for instance. You could put all these links to different pages that you designed. So for instance, in this situation here, your online course could be everything from the slideshows and all the unit material, and your agenda and homework could exist in Blackboard, and it just links out to here. That's a way I did it quite often for my Gen Chem courses. For integrating and homework systems, Dell's going to talk about that later on today with homework systems, how we interact with other ones, and then our own LibreText homework system as well. But in terms of integrating, that's been a difficult thing, because if your school and your students are 90% of the time using one Blackboard interface, then having them go outside of that for a different course is frustrating. Although I think it's more frustrating, to be honest, for the faculty than it is for the students. Students are digital natives, so they moving back and forth between things a lot easier than a lot of faculty think that they're able to do. But for homework systems, I'll leave that to Del to chat about later and bring that question back up.
I can mention something quickly about that if I could.
Sure.
So currently the books can be distributed in a variety of different ways. So online, which is what Justin was mentioning there, is probably one of the more popular ones, but you can export them as EPUB 3 in a few months, as PDFs, and also as common cartridges. Common cartridges can be embedded into learning management systems directly. So if you're in Canvas, they'll come in as modules. So you can just completely put in there. The book has to be compiled, so not every resource, you have to make a collection up in order to be able to process it, and then it's embedded in that way. The Adapt homework system is similarly, we got that operational last month. We're going to be fine-tuning a bit in order to be able to make it set up right, so it's not just a grade book transfer, but it's also through individual problems and coupling the quizzes and things like that. It's a bit more of a mess, but it's one of the workflows or use cases in order to be able to use the whole system. But I would concur with Justin if he was kind of going this way. I actually absolutely hate reading a book in a learning management system. There's junk all over the place. I think it's distracting, so I'm not a big fan of it. But I know that it's requested a lot, and hence we set it up in order to be able to run that way. So.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.